I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and here are your data points. Today, we are discussing AI law, and in particular, what does it mean to be practicing AI law? When I first started at Hogan, there was no such thing as a privacy and cybersecurity practice. There was actually no privacy class in my law school. That was 20 years ago. And I remember at the time hearing that maybe privacy is not the career track for me. Other people had advised me, stick with traditional legal disciplines of litigation, corporate, regulatory. And then a mentor gave me good advice. He said when he started practicing law in the 1970s and early 1980s, there was a new legal specialty at the time that had gathered the same skepticism. That specialty? Intellectual property. At the time, IP was considered a flash in the pan and maybe a fad, and thus something to be avoided by corporate and litigation partners. In hindsight, I think it's safe to say that both IP and privacy were pretty good bets and launched many careers. And I feel like we're actually on the cusp of potential new practice and legal innovation, AI. And by that, I don't mean how lawyers are going to be replaced by AI. It's not going to happen, by the way. But instead, is there a new legal discipline, a new legal specialty that human lawyers can perform by counseling both developers and users of AI? Does AI law look like IP in the 1970s and 80s, or privacy in the 2000s, or is it different? To discuss, I've invited two friends and leaders in the AI legal space, Tiffany Georgievski and Peter Tsapatsaris, to the podcast. Tiffany is an AI, data privacy, and IP lawyer at Sony. Peter is lead counsel of AI at Salesforce. Importantly, both Peter and Tiffany are speaking in their personal capacities and not on behalf of their respective companies. But both are super knowledgeable on AI and forward-thinking about AI legal careers. Peter, Tiffany, welcome to the podcast.
Maybe I can start, Tiffany, with you. Maybe you can just give in your own words, what is an AI lawyer and what do you think the role of an AI lawyer is within an organization?
Yeah, well, great question, especially for those of us who have AI lawyer as a title in our jobs now. So, I mean, it's as the name describes, a lawyer who's focused on legal issues arising from AI technology. So this is someone who understands how the technology actually works in practice to be able to issue spot. And so that could be everything from the supply chain and the AI development lifecycle, from the data to the developer to the deployer to the downstream users, which often means issue spotting things from an IP, privacy, or consumer protection perspective, and also advising on regulatory and compliance requirements associated with whichever technology your client is looking to have evaluated. But, one thing that I think it's important to note is that AI isn't new and lawyers aren't new. There's been plenty of attorneys who've been working on these types of tools and supporting the technology. But what's interesting now and why this is becoming its own title for some of us is that generative AI and regulatory regimes like the EU AI Act have really pushed to the forefront some interesting and sometimes very complex issues that fall at the feet of the legal community in large part to resolve. So I think it's a really interesting time. I like your introduction about, IP and privacy, because I think there's a lot of parallels to how those really gave rise to a new generation of attorneys. And I think we're going to see the same thing for AI lawyers.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And one of the things that you were pointing out is that there's a number of legal disciplines that are impacted, and we'll get to that in a moment. But at the heart of being an AI lawyer is the tech, right? In other words, AI itself is a form of technology. And while it's not new and it's been used for a long period of time, and lawyers have increasingly had a role in deploying this, I think one of the things that I often see, and interested in your perspective on this, Tiffany, is that in order for an AI lawyer to counsel effectively on AI, they really need to understand the technology that is behind the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what's changing for lawyers advising on this is how to really interrogate and diligence the tools, right, that your clients are using. So following what the research is telling us about the so-called black boxes, what are the different mitigation techniques and the types of legal issues that can flow from the various use cases. I like to think of it in the context of almost like the FTC when it comes to information security in terms of what is reasonable. And with these tools now, they're not so locked in as software may have been, where you really need to then continue to update your knowledge on what are reasonable standards when you're deploying these types of technologies. What are ways that we can reduce the risks to end users or to individuals who might be implicated or impacted by the technology? So, yeah, I think being able to understand the technology is an important aspect to it, but probably more important than having just a technical background is having that interest, having that thirst for being able to follow something that is continually evolving and isn't really locked into place.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. Peter, interested in your perspective on that, but maybe I am looking to try to understand what does it take to be an AI lawyer? Is there, a single textbook that I can read, or am I reading the entire kind of legal library?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think practicing in the field of AI is a little different than, say, being an IP lawyer or a privacy lawyer, or something that's a little more defined. And that, especially right now, it's a very interdisciplinary practice, right? If you're a young lawyer looking to build yourself up in this area, really the first set of skills is really just the skills of being a lawyer in the software industry, right? And that includes a lot of contracting, right? Commercial contracting, procurement, and then general corporate law issues, depending on where you might be in an organization or your clients' needs, like things like M&A, right? There are a lot of acquisitions in the field of AI now, or export control, right? These are all things that you might need to bring in. But beyond just the basic counseling that one would need to deal with software issues and licensing issues, if you're going to be counseling an organization that creates or deploys AI products, there are a few kind of pillars of skills that I think that a lawyer needs. I think of it in two main pillars. One is data privacy, and the other is IP. And on the data privacy front, if you ask me which law I interact with the most in my counseling of AI products at Salesforce, it's GDPR. We tend to use that as our bellwether for global privacy concerns and build our products, in legal compliance with it worldwide. They call it the Brussels effect in some places, where Brussels tends to legislate and we as a software industry follow. But really, data privacy, whether it be in the training data, whether it be in how you process the data of consumers or your customers, or how your customers process the data of their customers, you have to build in the tools to use these products in a legally compliant way. And the second big pillar, counseling a developer of AI, but rather a user, right? Or if you're a company that wants to deploy and use these AI tools, you really still need to know those issues, because you'll have to make a risk assessment on the IP risks of the output of a lot of these tools, right? And what your risk tolerance is as a company.
So two big ones, privacy, especially kind of thinking about privacy developments in the EU, then kind of this next kind of component of IP. And then how do you see, Peter, like the specific types of AI laws that may be emerging, whether that's the EU AI Act and maybe some of the similar things that are happening with different types of automated decision-making regulations in the US?
Yeah, it's interesting. It is kind of a Brussels effect again, right? We have the EU AI Act, which has been in progress for several years already. And that tends to be a risk-based framework that defines AI systems according to risk and then imposes regimes of compliance, right? And if for high risk, they're prohibited systems, their high risk systems require a lot of documentation and assessment. And then there are systems that don't require as much, right? And we are seeing this reflected in state law in the US that's popping up, proposed legislation in several states that tend to say, if it's a consequential decision making system, then you have to do this heightened assessment and audit. And what a consequential decision making system is tends to be categories of high risk systems like they have in the EU Act. So we're seeing a lot of that kind of idea proliferating.
And it's almost as if in order to do that, creating that level of documentation and creating that level of analysis is really going to require a steady hand who has done this before. In other words, kind of just leaning in saying, oh, sure, I can do an AI impact assessment, be the equivalent of, sure, I can write a patent and just file it with the patent office.
That's a good analogy, right? Yeah, because over the next few years, we're going to see industry standards arise around what it means to do a conformity assessment, right, as required by these laws. And it will take a practice specialty, I think, to keep abreast of those subjects and those forms.
So, Tiffany, interested in your perspective about where this discipline sits inside of the larger legal team within an organization, within an in-house team. Do you see that this is more of a business unit lawyer, kind of advising specifically the AI business unit within the organization? Do you see that this would be developing more as an enterprise resource that would cut across kind of multiple functional areas? How do you see that role being both deployed and perhaps where it's going to go in the future?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of parallels to be drawn to privacy, right? So it can be enterprise wide and it can also be very team or product specific. So I think certainly if you are developing AI, having basically a product counsel equivalent from an AI perspective is going to be required, as Peter said, right? There's a lot of things you're going to need to be required to comply with, right? There's going to be disclosures, perhaps. There's going to be a lot of actual product advising, but I think also having, a subject matter expert team, right? Or a cross-cutting team, or kind of someone that gives that global perspective, even from a strategy point of view, just like we do with privacy, just more, right? Broader into areas that aren't using personal information. I don't think it's necessary that, you're going to have an AI attorney in your government affairs team, on your patent team, on your copyright team, or, in transactional teams, but it really is going to depend on the volume of the work. So as Peter already alluded to, contracting, right? If you're doing high volume, you're going to need someone who understands the terminology that's used in the space to help you avoid a technical breach, what's reasonable to agree to, what's not. That's something that transactional attorneys can learn, but it can also be something that develops based off the volume in your work. Peter also mentioned it, M&A, right? I think there's a space for specialists in an M&A context, just as we do on large deals that are run by corporate attorneys. They'll have IP specialists, they'll have privacy specialists. I think AI as a specialty in an M&A context will also be an interesting subgroup. Same thing, IP protection, right? You probably don't need a new attorney just for patentability, but those attorneys will need to know it. And depending on the volume that your organization works with, it could develop into a role where you are the person who does that. One area that I think everyone's going to need to think about, and it's not very clear cut where it will fit within currently existing legal teams, will be from an ethics perspective. So people advising on the use of these technologies when it comes to fairness, transparency, and accountability, the social implications, the reputational harms. Basically, I think the teams that are currently focused on FTC enforcement actions, right, as we've seen with algorithmic discrimination, are going to be ripe for expanding out their expertise into the AI space. So it kind of just depends. Smaller organizations, you're going to have a person who's going to need to wear a lot of hats. Larger organizations probably can fit several people into product counsel roles, into strategy roles, into, their policy teams that will have plenty work to do just from an AI perspective.
To follow on that, my AI legal team sits in the product counsel's office at Salesforce, and our primary role is to vet Salesforce's AI and generative AI products for legal compliance. There's a whole host of other functions that require AI knowledge, right? Whether it be the commercial attorneys who are selling software or the government affairs folks that are trying to grapple with the policy issues, the ethics team. And a big responsibility is to create the ability to enable and scale knowledge about AI systems. And that's a really hard job right now. And everyone really needs to get to a point, especially if you're in a software company, with a baseline of knowledge about these things. And then you will be able to speak intelligently about it and efficiently about it. And you can leverage an SME who might be deeper in any particular facet of the technology.
I mean, I think both of your points are fascinating. And maybe, one of the ways that I have been thinking about it, interested in your reactions to this, is that I think oftentimes growing up in the legal space, corporate lawyers like to describe themselves as like the quarterback of a deal, right? To use a sports analogy, just continuing on that same sports analogy. Could it be that the AI lawyer, right, is the quarterback of the AI components of the technology? Because while, at least for me, right, if I were playing in this role, I probably wouldn't be the expert on product liability. I wouldn't be the expert on ethics. I wouldn't be the expert on trying to do the fairness reviews, right? Those wouldn't be the roles I would have. But I would certainly know, like, these are the people that I need to make sure that I'm looping in and that we're all kind of pushing forward to a common objective, even if they are deploying their skill sets in a much more precise and specific way. And I'm able to kind of help them kind of marshal their skills in this very precise area and focus on the right questions with the right solutions in mind, or the right answers as we're trying to achieve the obligations that we have under these new emerging laws. Interested in your thoughts on that. Is the AI lawyer really play that centralized role of multiple areas of expertise?
I think that's really apt. You need to be positioned somewhere in an organization, right? And you're going to need to be able to have relationships and a viewpoint in order to perform the function. So I think there has to be a concept of like a place in your organization where this person is going to sit, where they will naturally accumulate relationships and knowledge. If your office has product counsel, it's a very good place to do it, because product counsel tends to be at the crossroads of a lot of these conversations, right? Both with the commercial people and the product people who are building the things, and can bring in all those voices together to the extent necessary.
Yeah, I think for me, I think it kind of, the lawyerly answer, it depends. Depends on how an organization is set up. For me, I think what we can all agree on is there has to be collaboration. There has to be synergies, right? No one's going to want to do a privacy impact assessment and then an AI impact assessment. You're going to need to harmonize things to make things better for the business. Whether or not that's a push from an AI attorney or a pull from the relevant teams who are now faced with AI issues and can recognize that there's an expert somewhere within the organization that can help figure out a better process or how to handle the flow. I think, the only reason why I would push back against the quarterback perspective is just a lack of expertise and capacity, right? There's not that many people now that are going to be able to step into that role and be super trained and have enough of them to actually touch all the areas that we're talking about right now. Now that's going to change in a few years, right? Like privacy had to go through that growing pain. Now we see them in, law firm teams, in-house counsel have full-on teams, but I don't know that we're going to see that right away versus getting in some experts right away, having them work with the already existing structures when it's needed, when it's coming up. But in a few years' time, maybe we will see organizations have AI offices, right, that are quarterbacking and on par with the other, with InfoSec or privacy or IP, that kind of can quarterback those issues. But I think the harder part now is going to be building up the capacity within organizations, within existing lawyers, having the law schools really, teach these things so that junior attorneys are coming in with the skills to issue spot and add that kind of capacity so that more people can focus on that higher value work from quarterbacking from a strategy perspective.
Yeah, interested maybe, Peter, is a kind of further on this particular point is obviously there will be some specific areas of law. You mentioned privacy, IP as being two of the main ones. Then we have these emerging laws. So other than kind of those areas of knowledge, are there other particular skills that you think an AI lawyer needs to come to the table with in order to perform that role effectively?
Yeah, I do think there are some, and it's going to, beyond law, I do really strongly think that technical skills are very important, more important for someone trying to counsel in the AI field than in even other software fields. Having a very good computer science background in particular, it will help, shorten a lot of the conversations that you're going to have. It will help you develop the vocabulary and language you'll need. And to the extent, there are a lot of resources online, and Harvard has CS50, which is a really good introductory course to both computer science, and they have an AI course I recommend. If you really want to go all in, there are online bachelor's degrees you can get from really reputable institutions, or master's degrees, depending on your background. And it will very much help your counseling, right? Because then you don't have to take time learning what SQL is, right? When you're talking to a product team, and it will give you a lot. The engineers you're working with will appreciate not having to kind of explain the basics of how computers work to you. So technical knowledge, I'm a very strong believer in. You don't necessarily need to be an engineer, but you need to be at least willing to pick it up and learn it. And that's really important. And kind of the second category of skills, I think, are soft skills. I think to be in this field, you really need to be really a real problem solver that picks up stuff proactively and doesn't kind of wait for problems to surface and be reactive. And one really needs to look forward to enable the business as to what they want to do, right? And be creative in problem solving, because it's very easy to say no as an attorney, but it's a very fast moving field. You have to figure out ways to mitigate risk while still accomplishing the goals of your client. As far as soft skills go, organizational skills and relationships are really important here. You're going, as a lawyer in AI, you're going to be needing to direct the resources of a lot of other people, both attorneys and non-attorneys, and figuring out how to both operationalize that when these people may not be part of your reporting chain, might be someone in an entirely different part of the organization, someone who might be very senior in the organization. Figuring out how to get everyone together and get them moving in the same direction is really important.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. And, one of the ones that I was, resonated with me as you were describing that was the role and importance of kind of embracing the technology. I think, Tiffany, which is the point you were making a little bit earlier, in that in order for you to do, a fairness assessment, an accuracy assessment, a bias assessment, any of those, the various things that we think are going to be part of the landscape here, you would need to understand the technology well enough to be able to ask the right questions to kind of see whether there is a hole. It's almost like those who are practicing cybersecurity, and you would need to have a basic familiarity with the setup of an information technology back end, so that you're going to ask the questions when you're in the middle of an incident about what types of systems were compromised, and how is it that we have tried to root out those particular problems and identify where the root cause was, and making sure that we not only know what happened, but also we can know that it's not going to happen again. And if you don't understand how the technology is used, and importantly how the network is set up, you can't ask the right questions, and thus can't be effective in the role. And so, interested is like it. And I've had clients come to me and ask me, do I need a technologist within my legal team? And the answer is, maybe. But more importantly, I think it's trying to make sure that all of the lawyers feel comfortable in going into the technology and don't feel like just the vernacular and the language that people are using is such a barrier to entry that they feel like they can't engage.
Yeah, I think that's right. Although, I'm pro, you don't need to have a technical background. Because, I went to Georgia Tech for undergrad, but I am not an engineer. So I can say that as being surrounded by a lot of technical folks, that I don't feel my ability to understand the technology is diminished by not having it. And, for me, I have 3 small children. So going and doing some side, coursework is not generally an option I have. Time is a luxury. But I stand by what I said earlier, that I think as long as you have that interest to learn, and you can learn, right? If you don't, if you can't understand input and output, this might not be the thing for you. But if you have the ability, and if you have those kind of the skills they drill into you at law school of, I don't know what that is, I'm going to look and find out what that is. I'm going to understand what they're saying to me and then be able to issue spot. I think that's really all you need. That's all I had. And I felt I had a very successful run as a technology transaction attorney where I had to advise on all different types of technologies. Again, not with a technical degree and surrounded by other folks who didn't also have technical backgrounds, but were still equally able to advise from technology clients on legal issues. But I think being able to understand how the legal risks and come up, right? And same thing I think privacy attorneys had to go through. They had to understand cross-border data flows. Okay, is it actually leaving? Is it not? Open source attorneys had to figure this out when you said, well, is it distributed if it's a SaaS product? I mean, I think we have analogies that we can pull from other legal disciplines where you didn't have to necessarily. We didn't say you needed a technologist necessarily for those types of practices either. I think AI is going to be similar, where the strength will actually be in understanding how new current law applies to this new technology, but you don't actually have to feel scared of pursuing this as a career choice or pivoting into AI legal issues if you don't have a technical background. I really would encourage everyone to think more broadly about, like, can I understand the issues and how this came about? And part of that may be learning about the technology in going through that kind of investigation.
Yeah, as a history undergrad, Tiffany, I totally agree with that. I think feeling empowered to teach yourself, I think is the key wherever you go. And it's not that these concepts are super difficult to understand. It is that sometimes the language that's used is one that you're not familiar with, and thus the language is the barrier, not the content that prevents you from getting it. The other aspect that I'm interested in your thoughts, Stephanie, is the role of the industry expertise here, right? Because, obviously the deployment of AI can be broad and applicable in a number of ways, but the issues around AI and self-driving cars probably are different than, the uses of AI with respect to personalized medicine. Same technology that may be driving both of them, but also, very different types of safety issues, different types of important considerations to work through. Interested in your perspective on how important it is to understand the industry where you are deploying these tools as part of your overall advising.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head that sometimes it could be the same technology that's deployed in different ways. And I think that's what's interesting about AI. And what I find super fascinating is, we made the parallel to software already, and AI is like software on steroids, right? It can be in most products and services, and it has endless use cases. And just with software, having the industry expertise is really important. Like I said before, AI isn't new. There's already regulations that apply to a lot of these industries, right? So we already have regulations around automated decision making in certain industries like employment and healthcare. So yes, on one side, you do need to know the industry specifics of that. On the other side, depending on how an organization is set up, you could also, come at it from like a technology perspective. So your example of a self-driving car, right? Okay, well, if you put it back into, the technology and you're doing object detection, right? Detection can have a lot of issues in certain applications, and being an expert in what are all the areas where object or person detection can go wrong, right, can also help you. So it kind of depends if you're on the product team supporting like the development versus the go-to-market team that has to think about, I can take this one camera or sensor and I can put it into a car. I can put it into a medical device. Kind of depends, but I do think that we will continue to see, just as we saw with like blockchain, for example, the US is very sectoral when it comes to regulation, and we can expect, instead of seeing a very comprehensive AI approach, in lieu of that, or while we wait for something like that to come up, each industry basically attacking it from their own perspective. And then at the end of the day, also as well, is like we also have to think about the consumer protection angle, right? I think AI is going to affect a lot of people. So regardless of where you're sitting, you also want to think about, the FTC's role in AI. So again, this is kind of sector specific, but it's also kind of like issue dependent in terms of who's going to be impacted by the technologies. But yeah, I think it'll be a fun time. I think there'll be plenty of space for a lot of people to become experts, either from an industry perspective in terms of AI applications to just a technology perspective as well.
Yeah, so I think that perfectly, leads me to my last question, and I call this the prediction question. Is AI law going to be an important component of the legal bar going forward? Is this going to look like, as I was starting it up, as the 70s and 80s version of IP or the 2000s versions of privacy? Is this the 2020s version of the newest legal discipline that will kind of move a number of legal careers going forward and be super important for businesses to invest in? Or do you see it looking different? Interested in both of your perspectives on this. Maybe Peter, starting with you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I tend to think that it doesn't become its own, bar. I think everyone needs to basically kind of just acquire some skills to understand and counsel in this area. I think it becomes basically like dealing with, software. These are systems that are going to be all over the place. All sorts of companies are going to be buying them and selling them. And that doesn't mean necessarily every company has like an AI lawyer. But everyone who does procurement, software procurement, will have to know how to procure AI software in a safe way for data privacy issues. So I think because of that, and because of the cross-disciplinary nature of the field, you really just need to. We all just need to basically upskill all lawyers. Really, we just need to upskill on privacy, on IP, on contracts, and dealing with these things. And you can I think, like Tiffany was saying, you can come at it from a bunch of different places, whether it be from a go-to-market team or a product team or a commercial team, right? I think everyone's going to have to become fluent in AI concepts.
Tiffany, interested in your perspectives. A kind of a new legal discipline, an enhancement of existing disciplines. Where do you see this role going?
I see it being new in a sense. Like I don't think it's a fad. Let me put it that way. I don't think it's going to be NFTs or blockchain in that sense where, other people just upskilling will be enough. Again, it all depends on the organization, but I do think there's going to be a plenty of room to grow and have working groups and such like that, that are AI specific. I think there's enough issues that you're not going to be able to just learn through your standard courses and upskilling that are going to require you to be a semi-expert in IP issues and privacy issues and consumer protection or infosec, et cetera, and be close to that is a full-time job in itself that is going to give rise to new career opportunities for people who have just dedicated themselves in those realms. That's what I'm betting my career on. That's what I anticipate. There's just so many things that to be able to effectively counsel someone, you don't want to go to a law firm and have 4 partners sit around to tell you how to launch this product. Right? You're going to want one person who's going to be able to issue spot across all of it and give you that guidance. And I think because of that need, because of law firm rates, because not everyone has the ability to touch base with all those different departments, it's going to necessitate, you're going to be like, well, let's just go to Peter. He already knows all the answers and what all the other departments are going to say. And eventually that will just be his full-time job and people will start calling him the AI attorney. So I do think we'll see an evolution. I do think it'll be similar to what we saw, how the GDPR brought about privacy attorneys. I think the EU-AI Act and other regulations in this space will bring about a new breed of attorneys. And I'm looking forward to, having more AI conferences and that being a community in itself where we can geek out about what's happening in that space and what are the new legal developments for these types of technologies.
I agree with that, actually. I do think the challenge is, right, so certainly like I do this full time and we have a team and we all do it full time. The challenge is trying to disseminate the knowledge, right? So, it's not every question about generative AI has to be answered by one particular person or one particular team, but to create the scalable systems that we need to make sure that the entire legal organization can answer these questions. And that, goes for any legal team, whether it be a commercial legal team or a procurement legal team, that will be able to be equipped to handle questions about AI in the course of their normal business, just like we all have to know privacy law now. Right? It's hard to be in the field of software without at least having a reasonable familiarity with privacy law. It's going to be the same except for AI.
Yeah, so maybe a combination of the two of you. I think you both laid out very compelling cases for kind of where the future of this space is, and I feel like you're both right. Like there's going to be some need for that to be the core skill set to know how to do this and to know how to do it at the highest level. But it's also the case that probably everybody's going to need to know how to do this to some degree. Like privacy, your example, Peter, is the one resonates with me, is that everything seems to become a privacy issue nowadays. And if there's only like 2 privacy people within an organization, then sure enough, like you have 60 commercial lawyers and they have to, every single time the word privacy appears, they have to go and they have to talk to the 2 privacy people. There's a bottleneck, and it's not going to happen, at the scale and at the volume needed. To me, that's probably what's going to happen with AI. We all have to think that there's going to be specialists. There are going to be people like you, Tiffany, and like you, Peter, who are the AI lawyers. And then there's going to have to be a number of other lawyers who are going to say, and also I'm an AI lawyer and I play that on TV, and I can find myself I can be comfortable in that role when I need it and not necessarily need to hold myself out as the doing AI 24/7.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw that when SaaS came out, right? People had to reconceptualize what, for example, an NDA and non-disclosure meant in certain contexts, right? I think AI is going to be the same. If you can't disclose it, but you're using an enterprise tool that, has access, is that did you just make something available for training data? Did you not? Like, how can you negotiate this NDA in a way in the age of AI when it's going to be in everything? I think that kind of upskilling is going to be across the board, but it'll definitely go beyond that for sure. I mean, and someone is going to be in charge, either, in the legal team or in your outside counsel, who's going to pass down that guidance. Like, hey, in light of these new technologies and how they work, here's the recommended language when you're doing a SaaS agreement, when you're doing an NDA, when you're marking up a customer agreement, to help accommodate how the technology actually works. And those are going to be the AI attorney.
Well, that's a perfect, I think, conclusion, and I agree wholeheartedly with both of you. Tiffany, Peter, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and backgrounds with the audience. Greatly appreciate your being on the podcast. With that, I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and those are your data points.